Russia's Paralympians have had their last hope of competing in Rio dashed. The Court of Arbitration of Sport has rejected a Russian appeal against a blanket ban imposed earlier this month by the International Paralympic Committee, which condemned Russia's state-sanctioned doping of athletes. But the acting head of the Russian anti-doping agency has told the BBC that clean athletes should be allowed to compete.
We are trying to prove to the world that we are changing, we provided access to our data to UKAD, British Anti-Doping Agency. But I think that doping is not only a Russian problem, and all other countries, not all, but many other countries have the same problems as Russia. That's why Russian clean athletes should not be deprived their right to participate in Rio.
Well, Craig Spence from the International Paralympic Committee told the BBC that clean athletes should blame the Russian state for their exclusion from the Games.
I think the IPC was very clear on the 7th of August when we suspended Russia that our decision here was not about individual athletes cheating the system. It was a state-sponsored doping system that was cheating the athletes. And with the state-sponsored doping system that exists in Russian sport, which has been found now in 2 independent WADA reports, we have no confidence on which Russian athletes are clean and which have been doping. And therefore, we have held our member, the Russian Paralympic Committee, accountable for not fulfilling its membership obligations with regards to the IPC anti-doping code. And that's why we have taken this action that we have.
Well, to get an idea of how central the Russian team is to Paralympics, take a look at the London 2012 medal table. You can see that Russia finished second with 36 golds and a total medal count of 102. Well, our sports presenter Will Perry joins us now from our centre in Salford. Will, just what is this going to do to the Paralympics in Rio?
Hello, Jen. Well, I think even just from looking at that medal table which you just showed there, firstly, it'll have a huge impact, won't it, on the actual medals that will be dished out in Rio. But the International Olympic Committee will want it to have an enormous impact. And really strong statements today when you look at the words coming out of the IOC and their president, Sir Philip Craven, who's described Russia's anti-doping system as broken, as corrupted, entirely compromised, Craven says. He claims that it puts medals over morals, but he also went on to say that he's greatly encouraged by the decision from the Court of Arbitration for Sport to uphold that choice, that decision today. A new beginning, a catalyst for change in Russia, Craven has talked about. And the IPC, don't forget, made this decision after the McLaren report. This is going back to July, a detailed Russian state-sponsored doping program. And in that report, Jane, it says that Russian athletes benefited from what the report called of the disappearing of positive methodology, whereby positive tests had gone missing, and this goes into the Sochi Winter Olympics as well in 2014. They identified 27 samples, so a huge impact. It's a huge global story. Everyone's talking about it, and with only 2 weeks to go until the Paras get underway in Rio.
Of course, we don't know if all the athletes have been cheating. There must be some clean athletes in there, but what effect will this have on them? Because they've been training for these games all their lives.
Yeah, and you do have to feel, Jane, don't you, for those Paralympians who've, when you talk about 4-year cycles, they actually work in 8-year cycles for the Paralympics, a lot of these athletes. So I heard today a lot of them got their kit. A lot of them didn't even know when these decisions were being made today. So Sir Philip Craven, again, the IPC president, saying it's not a day for celebration, saying we have an enormous amount of sympathy for the Russian athletes who will miss out. But yeah, with 2 weeks to go, you've got dreams being crushed here, and there is a question, isn't there, of human rights. But the Russian sports minister, Vitaly Mutko, says that the ban was political, not within a legal framework as well. This one struck me. Oksana Savchenko, an 8-time Russian Paralympic champion. Yesterday, they said the mood was great. Everything seemed to be positive. Everyone thought that everything was going well. Everyone wanted our guys to finally go to Rio. Many received the equipment yesterday already, and now there's the decision, which they've described as absolutely shocking. Some other athletes have had their say as well. Roman Petrashikov, a Russian Paralympic champion, 6-time champion. They said we've been trodden to pieces and simply humiliation.
Well, bad news there. Will Perry, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, women who have children can be paid up to a third less than men for doing the same job. That's according to new figures from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Well, while gender pay gap has generally been falling in recent years, the study found that mothers who take time out or work fewer hours significantly miss out on wage increases. Our economics editor Kamal Ahmed reports.
The ups and major downs of the gender wage gap. Yes, it has been reducing overall, but for mothers and graduates, there is still a significant pay penalty. In this London park, opinions were clear. Having children presented major career challenges, ones that men often steer well clear of.
Women struggle with the issue of having to be perfect mothers at home and then having to be perfect in their career.
I've taken a pay cut because I've changed my career and I've changed my hours. So I don't think that's a gender issue, it's my choice.
The gender wage gap has been declining. In 1993, there was a 28% difference in the hourly income of men and women. That has now fallen to 18%. But there are significant variations. For mothers, the wage gap grows to 33% by the time the first child reaches 12 years old.
What happens when women reduce their hours of paid work? For whatever reason, at that point, a lot of them find that wage progression shuts down. Now, that could be because they are genuinely not gathering the skills and experience that employers value in those kinds of jobs. It could be something to do with some form of discrimination or power that employers are exercising over those women in holding down their wages.
She is showing them the correct way to polish.
The workplace has certainly changed since the 1940s, but the persistent wage gap is still with us. Before a family arrives, there is already a 10% difference in income. Some people argue that at least part of the gender pay gap is down to choice, mothers making the decision to leave work to look after their children. But although that may partially be true, is it really a choice when childcare is so prohibitively expensive for many? Is it really a choice when flexible working is not valued as highly by many businesses as traditional 9-to-5 working? And is it really a choice when mothers return to work that they miss out on future promotions?
We have about 750 employees, of which about 70% are women.
Laura Tennyson runs a mother and child clothing firm. She encourages employees, men and women, to work flexible hours and welcomes parents back to the office.
If you have been a full-time parent or been working in a less demanding job for a few years whilst your children are young, you've still got a huge amount to offer. And I'm very keen on employing people who've had their babies and are keen to come back into the workforce and really progress.
The government says it is acting. Businesses will be forced to publish the pay rates for men and women. More shared parental leave is available. But end the pay gap in a generation? That lofty target is still a long way from being hit. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Sam Smethers from Britain's Fawcett Society, which campaigns for women's equality and rights. Sam, for a long time, we've been told that things were getting better, but a 33% wage gap. What's gone wrong?
Well, this study shows very clearly the motherhood penalty that women pay in the labour market when they have children, and the 33% gap that you quote is what women experience after 12 years of being a mother. So 12 years after having their first child, the wage gap is 33%. And it's because of the way we structure our labour market, because of the unequal impact of caring roles, but women primarily are paying that price.
So what then can be done that hasn't already been tried?
Well, a number of things could change, and we're looking to government to make some of those changes. Firstly, we could see an opening up of quality part-time work. The UK economy in particular is very heavily dependent on low-paid part-time workers, and 75% of those are women. And we're really locking them into low-paid work for their life course, and that causes a massive hit on their earning power, and it results in this massive pay gap. And secondly, we could have leave entitlement structured in a different way. At the moment, we presume mothers will do the caring and they might share it with fathers, but really if we started from a presumption of equality, we would then remove some of that motherhood penalty and dads would take more of the caring role on.
Of course there is a need for equality, but clearly one size doesn't fit all. How can you create blanket policy for companies that may have different demands and different needs?
Well, we're simply talking about removing barriers to choice. At the moment, what we have are families operating within very tight constraints on the choices available to them. You know, if you're a woman looking for part-time work, you can't really get managerial or senior roles. They're very few around. And actually, what it would do for companies is to open up talent to them. We're wasting women's talents and skills in the economy. It's a massive price for employers. Actually, if they were creative about it and structured work differently, they'd get much better results for themselves and for their organisation. So it really requires a bit of flexibility, a bit of creativity on their part, and they would reap the rewards.
I can imagine some people listening to this, though, would say, well, if a woman chooses to take time out of the labour force and chooses to work part-time, then why should she be paid the same amount?
Well, it's not about saying that they should be getting the same as a full-time worker in terms of quantity of hours, obviously, but what the study shows is that there's an hourly pay gap. So by choosing to work part-time, what she's doing is consigning herself to a smaller choice of jobs at lower pay. And there is no reason why having to reduce your hours should mean, therefore, you get less per hour for your work. And, you know, part-timers are also missing out on training, they're missing out on promotional opportunities because they're not being taken as seriously in the workforce as full-timers. And that's an attitudinal problem that we need to change.
That was Sam Smathers there. President Obama is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to tour the devastation caused by historic flooding. He's meeting with some of the thousands of residents who suffered damage to their houses, schools and businesses. The storm has affected an estimated 60,000 homes. Well, for more on the president's trip, I'm joined by the BBC's David Willis. David, the sheer scale of this is hard to grasp. What's the president going to see?
He's going to see absolute devastation, Jane. This is an area which the governor of Louisiana described as having suffered an unprecedented and historic amount of flooding. We're talking about 30 inches of rainfall in the space of a weekend. Now, that's the sort of amount of rain that many parts of the United States get in an entire year. 60,000 homes have been damaged in that area, 8,000 people displaced, and more than a dozen deaths there as well. Particularly bad for this area is the fact that one of the worst hit areas, or among the worst hit areas, are those of low-income people who don't have flood insurance.
Well, of course, he's just arrived. He's said a few words. What's been his reaction to this?
Well, the president, of course, got a lot of criticism for continuing with his holiday in Martha's Vineyard, not rushing back. Into that leadership vacuum, if you like, stepped Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, and he made a lot of his visit down there. The governor of Louisiana actually welcomed that visit. In fact, he said that Donald Trump had helped to raise the profile of the situation in Louisiana. Nonetheless, the governor said he was very pleased that President Obama didn't come earlier because that sort of visit, that presidential visit, sucks up resources, diverts them away from the important work of salvage and relief and so on. So in the last few minutes, President Obama, 11 days after these rains came down, turned up there in Baton Rouge. He said he was heartbroken by the loss of life, as he put it. He said the prayers of the entire nation were with the people of Louisiana at this time. He said more than 100,000 people, Jane, have applied for federal relief. $127 million has been freed up already. And taking issue, perhaps, with the criticism that he's attracted for not going down there earlier and the publicity that Donald Trump has attracted, he said this is not a one-off photo op issue. It needs for all of Americans to stay focused on this in the weeks and months ahead.
Long time ahead for the folks of Louisiana. David Willis, thank you. Now, Turkey is stepping up an operation to drive so-called Islamic State militants from the Syrian border town of Jarablus. The Turkish army fired artillery shells into the town, and Syrian rebel fighters backed by Turkey are reportedly preparing for a ground assault. A short time ago, Turkey told people in the southern town of Karkamush to leave after it was hit by shells from IS militants over the border in Syria. The BBC's Mark Lowen is in the Turkish border town of Gaziantep.
Turkey was initially seen as a somewhat reluctant part of the US-led coalition against so-called Islamic State. There was a time in the first part of the Syrian war when the border, about an hour away from here, was seen as largely porous, allowing jihadists and weapons to cross too freely into Syria. But then there's been a wave of IS bombings against Turkey in the last year or so, including one last Saturday here in Gaziantep against a wedding party, killing more than 50 people. All the signs pointing to the idea that that was an IS attack. And that's seems to have woken the Turkish government up to the threat from the jihadists. And so now Turkey is preparing for a major offensive against the IS-held province of Jarablus on the other side of the border. Around 1,500 Syrian rebel fighters are here in Turkey preparing for that push. And last night, the Turkish government opened an aerial bombardment campaign against IS positions to open up a corridor for that imminent offensive. But at the same time, Turkey is bombing Syrian Kurdish positions to drive them away from the border, because Turkey does not want the Kurds to consolidate territory on the other side of the border, and because that could foster Kurdish separatism here in Turkey. So it is a two-pronged attack that Turkey is now considering and now launching. The fear for ordinary Turks is that that could prompt more IS revenge attacks here in Turkey, as this country increasingly pays the price of a war that is not its own.
Mark Lowen reporting there. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other news. The German government is considering reintroducing a form of national service for civilians to help the army deal with a future disaster. Conscription was abolished in 2011, but a partial reintroduction of it is being discussed as part of a new civil defence strategy. The leaked new plan also advises citizens to store enough food to last 10 days. Tourism chiefs in Paris are warning of an industrial disaster following recent terror attacks that have caused a severe decline in the number of visitors and revenue. There were 1 million fewer people travelling to the capital between January and June compared with the same period last year. The drop is estimated to have cost about $850 million in lost revenue. A federal judge in the US has ordered a review of nearly 15,000 new emails found on an unauthorized account used by Hillary Clinton during her time as Secretary of State. The judge said the US State Department must determine how much sensitive government information was disclosed. An earlier investigation by the FBI of more than 30,000 emails ended with no charges being brought. Now, yesterday, we brought you a story about the generation gap in the US and its impact on the American dream. Well, tonight we revisit those differences to examine the role of immigration policy in the US presidential election. The BBC spoke to the Magdaleno family, who came from Mexico and now call Kansas their home.
I have lived in Kansas probably for about 25 years. I was born in center of Mexico in a city named Guadalajara. My dad and my mom were very low income. I wanted to put my kids on a place where they could choose and they could dream, and I saw that in the United States.
I am an elementary school teacher. My family was very supportive, so I was able to graduate last year. I know that having an education in Mexico would not have been as easy or possible.
In Mexico, I was able to go only to 7th grade. I wasn't allowed to continue to go to school because the finances with my parents, but also the sexism that is culturally ingrained, that women particularly need to learn how to cook and how to keep and how to run a family. And I wanted something better for you. It's painful to decide we're not going back to our country to live. This is home because it's where our kids need to be.
I understand that one of the hardest or biggest parts for both you and Dad was leaving behind parents. Sometimes even I wonder if your guys' sacrifices are worth the connection with the families.
When I really questioned the cost is when I couldn't bring my mother. Being a permanent legal resident and trying to bring her over to share the happiness. 8 years being told no, she cannot come to this country. Being able to bring her just a month before she passed away, I think that's when I become a little bit of resentful. But the day that you graduated as a teacher, I told you that day I feel that it was worth it.
I think the sacrifices did and will continue to make our lives better. I hope to eventually get my master's degree in a few more years, and I hope for Tristan to continue that same thinking. I've told him that I want him to become something greater than what I have. So that way when he has his kids, they can become even greater.
You know? Yeah.
A very moving story there indeed. Well, I'm joined now by the BBC's Catty Kay. Catty, the pain that families experience when they're separated, as we've just heard, is often cited as a reason for comprehensive immigration reform. Why does it remain such a divisive issue in the US?
Because Republicans will say that it is people have come into the country illegally and they shouldn't be allowed any type of form of amnesty, and that if you allow people to come here illegally over the border and then you give them some kind of pathway to citizenship or legal status in which they can take jobs, then that will just encourage other people to come as well. I mean, actually, the numbers of people crossing that border have declined significantly since 2008. Net migration is now negative across that border. More people are returning because the Mexican economy has been doing better and the American economy has been doing worse. It's interesting that Donald Trump at the moment is kind of struggling with this a little bit as a campaign issue, having made it during the primary season a huge rallying point for conservatives. He's now rowing back, or his campaign seems to be rowing back, on one of the more controversial planks of his immigration platform, which was that he would deport those people who are here illegally. His campaign now says that's to be determined.
Yes, it's interesting you're talking about reverse migration, because Maria there, we're even questioning whether her mother's sacrifices were worth it. How is the Clinton campaign tackling this subject?
They've had a much more open attitude towards immigrants generally, and have said that they would like some kind of pathway, at least to legal status, for people here who are here in the country who are undocumented workers. They too, though, have, and President Obama has struggled with what they can do legally, because President Obama tried to allow some 5 or 6 million people who are here illegally, who have American-born children, to get legal status through executive order. The Republicans in Congress shut that down. They weren't allowed to do it. And if the Republicans hold on to Congress, I mean, immigration is going to be another of those issues. How much can a President Clinton, were she elected, actually get done on immigration reform if Republicans carry on controlling Congress?
A big issue still to come. Catty Kay, thank you very much for joining me. Now, a 2-year-old boy in Utah has become an internet sensation for a most impressive skill: the ability to fly. Will has Down syndrome, but has superpowers thanks to photos taken by his dad, Alan Lawrence. What started as a bit of fun has taken on a deeper meaning and made Will a star on social media. Alan spoke to the BBC about the awareness the images are raising.
Flying is obviously symbolic of being free and not burdened by something. It's that big dream that, wow, what if we could fly? We could do anything we put our minds to. We could do anything. My name is Alan Lawrence, and I am a photographer and father of 6 kids. Will is my 2-year-old son, and he's my second youngest. When I originally found out that Will had Down syndrome, I struggled with it. As I started to think more about these flying pictures of Will, I really started to recognize that there was a deeper meaning to these pictures, understanding that Will was a blessing to our family. One day I had the idea to just take him out into the yard and do a composite photo. I was holding Will in a pose that looked like he was flying. Then, using Photoshop, I would mask myself out of the photo so it looked like Will was just flying on his own. I decided to push the photos a little bit more, and I started posting them to my Instagram account using the hashtag Down syndrome and different things like that, and it just kind of took off from there. We joke that he knows he's a celebrity because when we're out in public, he's always saying hi and you know, trying to shake people's hands or give them a high five, and we joke that it's his celebrity status that makes him think that way. For anyone else who is just starting down this journey, I would say understanding that it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it is a big part of it. He's teaching us, even at a very small age, how to be patient, how to be non-judgmental, how to be unconditional in our love. We know that Will, even though he has Down syndrome, is going to be able to do anything he puts his mind to, and that he will fly, and that he can fly.
magical photos of a truly magical child there, and an inspiring story to end the programme. Next we'll have the weather, but for now, it's goodbye from me, Jane O'Brien, and the rest of the team.